The waiter had just cleared our dessert plates when Richard reached across the table and took my hand. The gesture was so uncharacteristically tender that I immediately tensed. In 45 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the subtle shifts in my husband's demeanor. "Barbara," he said, his voice clinical and detached, the same tone he used when delivering difficult news to patients. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. Around us, the upscale Chicago restaurant hummed with conversation and the soft clink of silverware. Just moments ago, I'd been basking in the glow of what I thought was a perfect anniversary dinner Richard had ordered. Champagne reminisced about our early days and even presented me with a tasteful diamond bracelet that now felt cold against my wrist. "I think we both know that things haven't been working for a while," he continued. I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What things?" "Our marriage. Barbara." He withdrew his hand and straightened his tie, a nervous habit from his days as a resident. "I've reached a point where I need something different, someone who understands the man I've become." The restaurant noise faded to a distant buzz as blood pounded in my ears. "Someone different." I repeated, my voice barely audible. "After 45 years, Richard sighed, looking annoyed at having to spell it out. "I need someone younger. Barbara, someone who can keep up with my life now, who shares my current interests. You and we've grown in different directions." I sat frozen, the diamond bracelet suddenly feeling like a shackle. 45 years. 2 children, one now deceased. 4 relocations for his career. Countless dinner parties, hosted for his colleagues. Endless nights spent alone while he worked late. All the deferred dreams and abandoned ambitions that I'd willingly sacrificed at the altar of his success. "There's someone else," I said. It wasn't a question. He had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable. "Melanie, my administrative assistant. It's been developing for some time." "How long?" My voice sounded strange, detached. 8 months, but that's not the point. Barbara. Even without Melanie, we would still be having this conversation. "I've already found an apartment. I'll have my lawyer contact you next week about the separation." In that moment, I realized he had planned to ruin our anniversary from the start. The champagne, the bracelet, the reminiscing, all carefully orchestrated to assuage his guilt before delivering the blow. "You chose our 45th anniversary to tell me this," I whispered. Richard checked his watch. A Rolex I had given him when he was appointed chief of cardiothoracic surgery 10 years ago. I thought it would be symbolic, and ending on the day we began, symbolic. As if 4.5 decades of my life could be tidily wrapped up over tiramisu and espresso. "I'd like to go home now," I said, standing on legs that felt oddly numb. Richard signaled for the check. "Of course I'll drive you and then head to my new place. I've already packed what I need for now." Of course he had. Richard and I met in 1978 at Northwestern's medical campus. I was 21 at my final year of nursing school. He was 23, a second-year medical student with ambitions of becoming a cardiothoracic surgeon. I still remember the first time I saw him hunched over textbooks in the library, his dark hair falling across his forehead, wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose. We married a year after I graduated. Those early years were lean but happy. I worked full shifts at Chicago Memorial while Richard completed medical school, then his residency, then his fellowship. Our apartment was tiny, our furniture secondhand, our meals often simple, but we had plans. Richard's plans primarily, that I embraced as my own. When Richard was offered a prestigious position at Mayo Clinic, I left my job without hesitation. When Michael was born a year later, I took only 6 weeks of maternity leave before returning to work to support our growing family. When our daughter Emily arrived 2 years after that, Richard's career was gaining momentum, but his hours were grueling. We discussed the logistics and decided I would step back from nursing to manage our home and children. "It's temporary," Richard assured me. "Once I'm established, you can go back. maybe even get your master's like you've talked about. But temporary stretched into years. Richard's star continued to rise. We moved again for his career. This time to Boston. I packed up our home, found new schools for the children, said goodbye to friends and colleagues I'd grown to love. Each time I told myself it was an investment in our future, our shared dream. By the time Richard was recruited back to Chicago to head the cardiac surgery department at Northwestern Memorial, I had been out of nursing for over 15 years. My license had lapsed, my skills outdated. The idea of returning felt increasingly impossible. Instead, I threw myself into being the perfect surgeon's wife. I managed our household with military precision, oversaw the children's education, and hosted dinner parties that helped advance Richard's professional connections. I became skilled at making conversation with hospital administrators and smoothing over Richard's social awkwardness with colleagues. "I couldn't do any of this without you," he would say on the rare occasions he noticed my efforts. "You're the foundation that makes it all possible." I believed him. I believed that our success was shared, that we were partners building a life together, even if our roles were different. Even after Emily's death from leukemia at 16, a loss that nearly shattered me, I maintained the facade of the supportive wife, giving Richard space to grieve in his own way by immersing himself in his work. Now sitting in the passenger seat of our luxury sedan as Richard drove us home for the last time, I realized what a fool I had been. The house was eerily quiet when we returned from dinner. Richard moved with practiced efficiency, collecting his pre-packed bags from the closet where he'd hidden them. I watched him from the doorway of our bedroom as he gathered toiletries and checked drawers one last time. "When did you lease the apartment?" I asked. Richard barely glanced up. 3 weeks ago, it's in Streeterville, close to the hospital." "And Melanie, is she waiting for you there tonight?" His shoulders stiffened. "She's not moving in, if that's what you're asking. We're taking things slowly." I laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "Slowly, after destroying a 45-year marriage. How considerate of you both." "Barbara, please. This isn't productive." He zipped his suitcase with finality. "My lawyer will contact yours. I hope we can handle this with dignity." "I don't have a lawyer." He looked at me then with what seemed almost like pity. "You should get one. I can recommend someone if you'd like." "I'm sure you can," I replied, stepping aside as he moved toward the door. "Someone who'll make sure I don't get too much of what you think is yours." Richard paused, suitcase in hand. For a moment, I thought I saw regret flicker across his face. "I've never been unfair, Barbara. You'll be well taken care of." And then he was gone. The door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than a slam would have, I wandered through our 5-bedroom Lincoln Park home, the home we'd purchased when Richard became department chair 10 years ago. Everything in it reflected his status and success. The antique Persian rugs, the original artwork, the custom kitchen I designed to entertain his colleagues. Even the family photos on the walls were carefully selected to present an image of accomplishment and harmony. In our home office, Richard's medical diplomas and awards dominated one entire wall. My nursing certificate was nowhere to be seen. I'd stopped displaying it years ago. I sat at his desk and turned on his computer. He'd changed the password. Of course. But I knew Richard knew his habits, his patterns of thinking. On my 3rd attempt, I was in. His emails opened before me, and I didn't have to search long. There they were, dozens of exchanges with Melanie Parker, dating back nearly a year. I read through them with a strange detachment, as if reviewing a patient's chart rather than evidence of my husband's betrayal. The clinical part of my brain noted the progression, professional messages giving way to personal comments, inside jokes. Emerging planning meetings outside of work hours. I recognized the weekend last November when Richard claimed to be at a medical conference in New York. There were hotel confirmations for 2 in his email trash folder. But what cut deeper than the evidence of physical infidelity were the things Richard told Melanie about me, about us. Barbara has never really understood the pressures of my position. We've been living separate lives for years. She's comfortable, but we have nothing in common anymore. I stayed because of obligation, but life is too short to sacrifice happiness for duty. Lies, all of them. Or were they? Had I been blind to his unhappiness? Had I become so accustomed to structuring my life around his needs that I'd failed to notice when he no longer wanted what I offered? I closed the email and shut down the computer. Then I went to our bedroom and methodically removed Richard's remaining clothes from the closet, placing them in garbage bags. I wasn't angry, not yet. That would come later. For now, I felt only a cold, clear purpose. By morning, I had packed up everything that belonged exclusively to Richard Ver, placed the bags in the garage, and sent him a text. Your remaining belongings are in the garage. Please collect them by the weekend. Then I called Michael. He did what? Michael's voice exploded through the phone. At 42, our son had his father's intensity, but thankfully his late sister's compassion. I repeated the story, trying to keep my voice steady. That absolute bastard, Michael muttered. On your anniversary, no less. And with his assistant, could he possibly be more of a cliché? Despite everything, I found myself defending Richard out of habit. He says it's been building for a long time, that we've grown apart. Mom, stop. Michael's voice softened. You don't need to make excuses for him, not anymore. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, our kitchen, and faced the truth of Michael's words. For decades, I'd deferred to Richard on financial matters. I knew we were wealthy. Richard's position as a top cardiac surgeon and later as medical director ensured that. But the details of our investments, our retirement accounts, our exact net worth, those had always been Richard's domain. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. When I opened it, Patricia Wilson stood on my doorstep, concern etched across her face. Michael called me, she said without preamble. Oh, Barb, I'm so sorry. Patricia and I had met when our children were in elementary school together. Over the years, she'd become my closest friend, standing by me through Emily's illness and death. Unlike me, Patricia had continued her academic career while raising her children, eventually becoming a professor of sociology at the University of Chicago. You'd better come in, I said, stepping aside. Patricia followed me to the kitchen, where I mechanically prepared coffee. Do you want to talk about it? Not much to say. 45 years, and he wants someone younger. The words felt foreign on my tongue. The classic midlife crisis, except he's too old for it to be midlife unless he plans to live to 140. Patricia's attempt at humor fell flat. Sorry, that wasn't helpful. It's fine. Gallows humor seems appropriate. How are you really doing? She asked. Her eyes searching my face, I considered lying, then decided against it. I'm numb. I keep waiting to feel something: rage, grief, anything. But it's like I'm watching someone else's life fall apart. Patricia nodded. That's shock. The feelings will come, and when they do, they'll hit hard. But right now, while you're thinking clearly, we need to make some plans. Plans. Barb, I went through this 15 years ago, remember? Not after 45 years. Thank God, but the dynamics are the same. Men like Richard and my ex. They think they can discard decades of partnership when something newer catches their eye, and they expect to dictate the terms of that discard. I flinched at her bluntness. I'm sorry, she said, reaching for my hand. But you need to hear this. Richard has been planning this for months. He has lawyers, financial advisors, and a strategy. Meanwhile, you're just trying to process the fact that your life has imploded overnight. She was right, of course. Even now, Richard was probably meeting with his attorney, detailing exactly how much he was willing to give me from the life we'd built together. I don't even know where to start, I admitted. Patricia squeezed my hand. You start by calling Thomas Rogers. He's the best divorce attorney in Chicago, especially for cases like yours. Thomas Rogers' office overlooked Millennium Park, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The man himself was nothing like I expected. In his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and tortoiseshell glasses, he looked more like a university professor than a cutthroat divorce attorney. "Mrs. Collins," he said, rising to greet me. "Please have a seat." I perched on the edge of a leather chair, clutching my purse like a shield. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Patricia is an old friend, and cases like yours are my specialty." He sat back down, folding his hands on his desk. "Now why don't you tell me what's happened?" I recounted the events of the past week, the anniversary dinner, Richard's announcement, his hasty departure, and the discovery of his affair with Melanie. Thomas listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he looked up with kind but determined eyes. "Mrs. Collins, may I call you Barbara?" I nodded. "Barbara. What you're describing is unfortunately common in my practice. Successful men who decide often in their 60s or 70s that they deserve a fresh start with a younger partner. And too often, the wives who supported them through their rise to success are left with far less than they deserve." "Richard said I'd be well taken care of," I said, hearing the bitterness in my voice. Thomas smiled thinly. "I'm sure he did. But what does that mean exactly? A fraction of what you're entitled to, I suspect." "I don't even know what we have," I admitted. "Richard always handled the finances." "That's typical as well, but we'll change that." He leaned forward. "Barbara, before we go further, I need to ask you something important. Do you want to try to save this marriage?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I haven't had time to think about it." "Take some time now," he said gently, "because how we proceed depends largely on your answer." I stared out at the Chicago skyline, the city where I'd spent most of my adult life. I thought about Richard. Not the man who'd coldly informed me our marriage was over, but the ambitious young medical student I'd fallen in love with. I thought about our early struggles, the children we'd raised, the grief we'd survived together after Emily's death. 4.5 decades of shared history. And then I thought about those emails to Melanie, the careful planning behind my back, the calculated cruelty of choosing our anniversary for his announcement. "No," I said, finally surprised by the firmness in my voice. "I don't want to save it. I want what I've earned." Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "Good. Then let's talk about what that means." For the next hour, he explained the concept of marital property under Illinois law, and how nearly everything acquired during our marriage would be subject to division, including Richard's medical practice, his pension, and his investments. "But what about my contribution?" I asked. "I haven't worked in decades." "That's precisely my point," Thomas said. "Illinois courts recognize something called the spousal career asset. Essentially, your support of Richard maintaining the home, raising the children, relocating for his career, hosting professional events, directly contributed to his earning capacity. That support has real monetary value." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. So my years as his wife count for something. They count for a great deal, particularly in a case like yours, where the disparity in earning potential is so dramatic, and where you sacrificed your own career advancement for his. He slid a legal pad across the desk. "I need you to start documenting everything, every social function you hosted for his colleagues, every relocation for his career, every professional opportunity. You declined to support his, and will need a complete picture of your financial situation." "Richard won't make that easy," I warned. Thomas smiled, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. "He doesn't have to make it easy. That's what legal discovery is for." As I left his office, clutching a folder of forms and instructions, I felt something shift inside me. The numbness was receding, replaced by a growing resolve. Richard had spent months planning his exit strategy. Now I would plan mine. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Following Thomas's advice, I opened my own bank account and transferred half the money from our joint checking account. A move that prompted an angry call from Richard, which I let go to voicemail. I applied for my own credit cards, gathered important documents, and began the painstaking process of reconstructing our financial history from bank statements and tax returns. Patricia introduced me to her financial advisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane, who helped me understand the true scope of our assets. The picture that emerged was startling. Beyond Richard's considerable salary, we had investment properties I'd never known about, offshore accounts, and a vacation home in Michigan that Richard had purchased 3 years ago without my knowledge. He's been planning this for years, I told Patricia over coffee. Setting aside assets, creating separate accounts. Men like Richard always have an exit strategy, she replied. They're used to contingency planning. It's what makes them successful in their careers. And terrible husbands? I added, surprised by my own bitterness. Meanwhile, Richard's attorney, a sleek, intimidating woman named Elena Vasquez, sent over a proposed settlement agreement that confirmed my worst fears. Richard was offering me the house, a modest monthly alimony payment, and a one-time settlement that represented perhaps 15% of our actual net worth. This is insulting, Thomas said when I forwarded him the proposal. But it's just an opening position. Don't worry, we're going to counter with something that will make his eyes water. True to his word, Thomas prepared a counter-proposal that valued my contribution to Richard's career at approximately half of his lifetime, earnings a figure in the millions. He also demanded ongoing alimony equal to half of Richard's current salary, ownership of the Michigan vacation property I'd just discovered, and half of all retirement and investment accounts. Richard's response was swift and furious. He showed up at the house unannounced one evening, waving a copy of our counterproposal. "Is this a joke?" he demanded when I opened the door. "You want half of everything I've earned. You haven't worked a day in 35 years. I stepped back, allowing him into the foyer, but no further. I worked every day. Richard, I just didn't get paid for it. Don't be ridiculous. I'm the one who got up at 5 a.m. for surgeries. I'm the one who spent 12-hour days at the hospital. I'm the one who built my reputation through decades of hard work. And who made that possible? I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Who raised our children almost single-handedly? Who moved across the country multiple times for your career? Who hosted dinner parties and charity events to advance your professional standing? Richard dismissed my words with a wave of his hand. That's what wives do, Barbara. It doesn't entitle you to half my life's work. It was our life's work, I corrected him, and the law agrees with me. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You've changed. No, Richard, I've just stopped pretending to be less than I am. After he left, I called Michael, my hands shaking as I recounted the confrontation. He actually showed up at the house. Michael sounded alarmed. Mom, you should change the locks. He still owns half the house, I reminded him. Legally, he has the right to enter. Legally, maybe, but he gave up any moral claim when he walked out on you. Promise me you'll at least consider changing the locks. I promised, though I had no intention of doing so. Despite everything, I couldn't imagine Richard becoming physically threatening. His weapons had always been more subtle. Words, looks, dismissive gestures. The next day, Thomas called with news that shifted the battlefield dramatically. We've received some interesting information, he said, his voice carefully neutral. It seems Dr. Collins has been less than forthcoming about certain financial matters. What kind of financial matters? Specifically, a series of transactions involving hospital vendors. Nothing definitively illegal, but certainly questionable enough to warrant further investigation, possibly by the hospital board or even regulatory authorities. My stomach clenched. Where did this information come from? An anonymous source, Thomas replied. Possibly someone within the hospital who's sympathetic to your situation. The point is, this gives us significant leverage. Dr. Collins would not want this information becoming public, even in the context of divorce proceedings. I thought about Richard's carefully cultivated reputation, his position as medical director, the speaking engagements and consulting work that depended on his pristine professional image. What are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting we use this information to negotiate a more favorable settlement, one that truly reflects your contribution to Dr. Collins's success and ensures your financial security going forward. The old Barbara, the one who had spent decades supporting Richard's career and protecting his interests, would have balked at such tactics, but that Barbara had been discarded over tiramisu on her 45th wedding anniversary. Do it, I said. The settlement conference took place on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. 6 weeks after Richard's announcement, Elena Vasquez arrived first. Sleek in a charcoal suit, followed minutes later by Richard himself, looking thinner than when I'd last seen him, but no less imposing in his surgical precision. Thomas and I entered last. A strategy he'd explained was meant to subtly establish control of the proceedings. I wore a conservative navy dress that Patricia had helped me select. My hair freshly styled. My expression carefully composed. As Thomas laid out our revised demands, still substantial but slightly moderated from our initial counterproposal, I watched Richard's face. He listened with growing impatience, occasionally leaning over to whisper to Elena. I could read the dismissal in his posture, the certainty that these demands were merely an opening gambit to be negotiated downward. Then Thomas casually slid a folder across the table. Before we proceed further, we thought Dr. Collins might want to review these documents. He said they relate to certain vendor relationships at Northwestern Memorial that may be relevant to our discussions. Richard frowned, opening the folder. As he scanned the contents, his expression shifted from confusion to shock to carefully controlled anger. Elena leaned over to see the documents, her eyebrows rising as she read. This is nothing," Richard said, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed him. "Administrative matters that have no bearing on our negotiations." "Perhaps," Thomas replied mildly. "But I imagine the hospital board might take a different view, not to mention the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation." Elena whispered urgently to Richard, who appeared increasingly agitated. After a tense exchange, they requested a break to confer privately. When they returned 20 minutes later, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Gone was Richard's dismissive confidence, replaced by a grim resignation. "We're prepared to discuss a more equitable arrangement," Elena announced, her voice carefully. Professional, the subsequent negotiations moved swiftly. By late afternoon, we had the framework of an agreement, a 60-40 split of assets in my favor, substantial ongoing alimony ownership of the Chicago house and the Michigan property, and full health insurance coverage for life. As we prepared to leave, Richard approached me while Thomas was gathering his documents. "You've won, Barbara," he said quietly. "I hope it makes you happy." I looked at the man I'd spent most of my life with. The father of my children. My partner through joy and grief, now essentially a stranger. "This isn't about winning, Richard. It's about fairness, something you seem to have forgotten." He flinched slightly. "I never meant to hurt you." "Yet you planned it for months, possibly years. You hid assets, cultivated a relationship with a younger woman, and then delivered the news on a day that should have been a celebration of our life together." I picked up my purse, suddenly exhausted. "If you didn't mean to hurt me, you would have handled things very differently." As I turned to leave, Richard asked, "What will you do now?" The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of legal proceedings and financial discoveries, I hadn't thought much beyond securing my future. What would I do with whatever years remained to me? "I don't know yet," I answered honestly, "but for the first time in decades, I'll be deciding for myself." 3 months after the settlement was finalized, I sold the Lincoln Park house. The place had never felt like mine alone, and every room held memories of a life that no longer existed. With Thomas and Diane's help, I purchased a sleek 2-bedroom condominium in a high-rise, overlooking Lake Michigan, a modern space with no history where I could begin again. Patricia helped me furnish it, encouraging me to select pieces that reflected my own taste rather than what would impress Richard's colleagues. The result was far less formal than our previous home, with comfortable seating, colorful artwork, and a small but well-equipped kitchen, where I found myself experimenting with recipes purely for my own pleasure. It suits you, Michael said when he and Sophia visited for the first time. I can actually imagine you living here. As opposed to the mausoleum Dad insisted on, he added with a wry smile, your father had certain expectations about how we should live. I replied, surprised to find I could now speak of Richard without pain, and I went along with them for so long that I forgot I might have preferences of my own. Michael studied me thoughtfully. You know, Mom, I don't think I've ever seen you this. I don't know alive. It's like you were playing a role all those years and now you're finally yourself. His words stayed with me long after they left. Had I really been playing a role all those years? Or had I simply subsumed my identity so completely in Richard's that I'd forgotten where he ended and I began? The question led me to another. Who was I when stripped of the roles of wife, mother, hostess, supporter? What did Barbara Collins soon to revert to? Barbara Mitchell, my maiden name. Actually want from this unexpected third act of her life? The answer came gradually as I began to reconnect with parts of myself long neglected. I enrolled in a literature course at the local community college. Rekindling my love of books, I joined a women's hiking group that explored forest preserves around Chicago. I volunteered at a children's hospital, finding that my nursing training, though decades old, still provided a foundation for meaningful service. And 6 months after Richard's announcement over tiramisu, I applied to Northwestern's School of Nursing to complete the master's degree I'd abandoned when our children were born. Are you sure about this? Patricia asked when I told her. Not that I don't think it's wonderful, but it's a significant commitment at this stage of life. I'm not expecting to restart a nursing career, I explained. But finishing what I started, it feels important, like reclaiming a piece of myself that got lost along the way. Almost exactly a year after our fateful anniversary dinner, I encountered Richard at a hospital fundraiser. I was there as a guest of Patricia, whose department received significant support from the event. Richard, as medical director, was obligated to attend. I spotted him across the ballroom, deep in conversation with hospital board members. He looked older, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, his posture less commanding. Then I remembered Melanie was nowhere to be seen. Later, as I was getting a drink from the bar, Richard appeared beside me. Barbara. He nodded, his eyes taking in my simple but elegant black dress, my confident posture. You look well. Thank you, I replied, accepting my wine from the bartender. So do you. It was a polite lie. Up close, Richard looked exhausted. The spark that had once defined him noticeably dimmed. I heard you're back in school, he said. Nursing, right? Yes, I'm finishing what I started 45 years ago. A flicker of something regret-admiration crossed his face. Good for you. You were always an excellent nurse. It's what first attracted me to you, you know. Your competence. Not my stunning beauty or sparkling wit, I teased, surprised to find I could joke with him. He smiled, the expression softening his tired features. Those too, of course, but mainly the competence. I'd never met anyone so capable. We stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. How is Melanie? I asked finally, more out of politeness than genuine interest. Richard's smile faded. She's no longer in the picture. It didn't work out. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Not because I wanted Richard to be happy with his younger woman, but because no one deserved to have their heart broken twice in one lifetime. These things happen, he said with forced lightness. And are you seeing anyone? The question startled me. No, I'm focusing on myself right now. It's rather novel, actually. Richard nodded, his eyes meeting mine with unexpected candor. I made a mistake, Barbara. Not just with Melanie, but with us. I didn't appreciate what we had. And a year ago, those words would have meant everything to me. Now they were just words spoken too late to change anything. Perhaps not. I agreed. But I've made peace with that. And in an odd way, I'm grateful for where I've landed. He looked startled. Grateful? Yes. If you hadn't ended our marriage, I might never have discovered who I am, outside of being your wife. It's been illuminating. Richard seemed about to say more when a colleague called his name from across the room. I should go, he said reluctantly. But it was good to see you, Barbara. Really good. As he walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. The man who had dominated my life for 45 years was now just a person. I used to know someone whose choices had shaped my past but no longer controlled my future. Later that evening, as Patricia drove us home, she asked, "How is it seeing Richard?" I considered the question carefully. Surprisingly okay. He looked tired. Said things didn't work out with Melanie. Patricia snorted. Of course they didn't. Men like Richard don't actually want partners. They want reflections of their own glory. When Melanie turned out to be a real person with her own needs and opinions, the shine probably wore off quickly. That's rather harsh, I said, though I couldn't entirely disagree. Maybe, Patricia conceded, but am I wrong? I thought about our marriage, how Richard had always dictated the terms, how I had shaped myself to fit his needs, how I had mistaken accommodation for love. No, I admitted, you're not wrong, but I'm not angry anymore. That's what surprised me most. Seeing him just made me realize how far I've come. Patricia glanced at me with a smile. You really have, it's been remarkable to watch. When I returned to my condo that night, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a small glass of the expensive scotch I'd started to enjoy, another small rebellion against Richard's insistence that ladies drink wine, not whiskey. I carried it out to my balcony and looked at the city lights reflecting on Lake Michigan. The year had been a journey through grief, rage, rediscovery, and finally, a tentative joy. I thought about the younger Barbara, the nursing student with dreams and ambitions who had fallen in love with a driven medical student. What would she think of me now? Would she be disappointed by the years spent in Richard's shadow, or proud of the woman who had emerged from it? Perhaps both. We make the choices we can with the understanding we have at the time. The important thing was that I was making different choices now. 2 years after Richard's announcement over tiramisu, I graduated with my master's degree in nursing education. Michael, Sophia, and their children attended the ceremony along with Patricia and a small circle of new friends I'd made through school and my volunteer work. As I accepted my diploma, I felt not just pride in my academic achievement, but something deeper, a sense of having reclaimed a piece of myself long surrendered. The woman who had been discarded at her 45th anniversary dinner was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more herself. That was not a tragedy. It was a triumph.